First off, we need to remove the spark plug cover. There's 4 bolts that hold that on. And then we need to remove the coil packs and the plug wires. We want to actually leave the spark plugs in case we drop any tools or bolts down inside the engine. The spark plugs will keep it from falling down all the way inside. Then the timing belt cover, there's 2 bolts on top and 2 bolts a little bit farther down on the sides. And then it just kind of pries off and then pulls up and slides out. It may be kind of stuck on with time, but it's not glued on. You just have to pry on it a little bit. The next step is to try and line up the cams with top dead center. You notice that there's a notch on the cam gears and there's a corresponding notch on the valve cover. So what I've done is put the car in 3rd gear and I'm just rocking it forward a little bit until the notches line up pretty closely. If we start with everything at top dead center, we know where to put it back to in case anything moves while we're doing the install. Also, that means that the dowel pins on the cams are going to be facing up. So just get as close as you can. Doesn't need to be exact. Also, if you look down on the crank pulley itself, you'll notice a small white hash mark. It's kind of hard to see in the video, but it should line up with a T on the plastic cover right above the pulley. So now that everything's lined up at top dead center, I've left it in gear with a handbrake on so that the engine can't move. And now you just have to get all of the rest of the parts out of the way. There's this little bracket in the corner here, which has 1 bolt. You have to undo that bolt and remove it. I've also removed the 2 bolts in the back that hold the fuel injector wire harness, and just kind of tuck everything back out of the way. Then there are 2 breather hoses, one on the driver's side, which just pulls off, and then another one on the back side, which is attached to the PCV valve here. So I'm just using pliers. You undo the hose clamp, and then the hose just slides off. You also need to undo the wiring harness, which runs across the top of the valve cover. You can just unplug it and move that stuff out of the way. And then here I'm undoing the bolts which hold down the valve cover. There are 6 bolts around the outside, and then these 2 on the side here, don't forget that. And then 5 down here on the inside, and there's 1 underneath this little bracket which you have to remove. Once you have all the bolts out, you should be able to just pull up. I usually use the oil fill cap and the vent hose fitting as handles, and it just kind of pries up. It'll be sort of stuck on there over time, but if you work at it a little bit, it'll come right off. Now we want to keep the timing belt from slipping off of the cam gears. So I'm using zip ties here, just zip tying it down tightly to the cam gears. You want to use at least 2 or 3 per cam gear. And when we're actually doing the cam replacement, we're only going to work on 1 cam at a time. So I'm going to do the entire intake cam, removing the gear, removing the cam, putting the new cam in, putting the gear back on, before I even touch the exhaust cam side. I think it's easier to just do 1 cam at a time. There's less chance of having the timing belt lose slack and fall off of the crank pulley. Now at this point I still have tension on the timing belt. So I'm using this tensioner tool, which you can purchase from the dealer, or you can make yourself using threaded rod, and you just weld a nut onto the end so you have something to turn it with. And this threads down and pushes against the tensioner to remove all of the pre-tension on the belt. It's important to use anti-seize grease. Put it liberally onto the timing belt tensioner tool, and then just remove any, in this case there's the crank angle sensor wire that runs up next to it. There's a little rubber plug that fits in the hole there for the tensioner tool. And then you slide the tensioner tool in, you can see it goes in at an angle. It's about a 45-degree angle to the motor. And then the tensioner tool needs to screw in a lot. It screws down several inches. So this process takes forever. But basically, I'm hand turning it as much as I can, and then you just use a wrench and just keep cranking on it, and make it pretty tight. I'd say about 30 foot-pounds of torque. Eventually, you'll feel it kind of stop. It'll bottom out, and that's pretty much it. Now, to remove the bolt which holds the cam gear to the cam, this bolt is very tight. So I use a breaker bar, and then I use a large crescent wrench. And you stick this on the cam. There's a spot on the cam you'll see for a wrench. And sometimes it helps if you have somebody else to help you out here to hold one of the wrenches. But if you're lucky, you can just break it loose. Once you have the bolt all the way out, the cam gear pretty much pops off, although in a lot of cases it's stuck on there pretty good.